Welcome, everyone. Thanks for watching. Our previous program focused on town steps to prepare for the predicted impacts of climate change. Today, we consider what we each can do in our own homes to limit the amount of greenhouse gases our activities put into the environment. We know that the more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere, the worse our future climate will be. With me today are Arnie Epstein. He's the town energy manager for Stow and a member of the leadership team of Elders Climate Action. And Tom Amiro, a homeowner from Chelmsford and a member of ECA. He's also with us on the last program, so he's experienced at this, which is good. To focus on how our households contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, let's begin by looking at where those emissions come from. We have a slide that will help. There it is. To Arnie, what are the main contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in our daily lives?
So for households, the pie chart that you're seeing on the screen shows the total emissions for an average household in the state. And it's broken up into two primary sectors, one being transportation and the other emissions from the home itself.
And then,
as you can see, the emissions from the transportation pie slice are slightly bigger than those from the home itself. And just a bit of more background there for a typical home. We're assuming, or the census data is that it's got 2.5 residents and 2 private vehicles.
And then if we look a little closer at household emissions only, we got another slide. So here we see household emissions compared to total state emissions. We begin to see what part of the household emissions contribute to the greenhouse gases the state emits. Exactly.
So this pie chart is illustrating total emissions in the state of Massachusetts. That's the whole pie. The orange section represents emissions other than household emissions, and surprisingly to many, and the household or the cumulative sum of household emissions in the state represent significantly more than half of our total state emissions. And we'll dive into what those household emissions are, but just to give you a sense of what the other emissions are talking about, they're talking about emissions from the commercial sector, the industrial sector, municipal buildings, transportation, other than private vehicles, agriculture, and so on.
Tom, what surprises you, if anything, in how this perspective on the role of our daily household activities contribute to greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, I'm just surprised that our contribution is greater than industry, public sector, government. So that's good. In that, it means we can do more as individuals.
Yeah. If we think, household covers a lot, and we've already mentioned some of the things. Maybe we can look at the next slide and look a little bit more closely at it. So I think we got that up now.
Great. Yeah, so this slide represents the emissions resulting from the home itself. So that's less the private transportation emissions that we showed earlier. We'll touch on a little bit later. But I think you can see from this pie chart that home emissions are comprised of 4 primary slices of the pie. The biggest one by far is home heating. That's the yellow or yellow-orange section of the pie. That's more than half of it, 59%. And another 16% is the energy used to generate your hot water. So fully 3/4 of the energy use and emissions in a typical household come from heating your home and generating hot water. The other pie slice, the quarter of home energy use is lighting, appliances, electronics, and so on, which already run, for the most part, not exclusively, on electricity. So we're going to be talking about the role of electricity later on.
Tom, how does Arnie's picture of household energy use relate to your own experience as a homeowner?
Well, I think it's really hard because we can't really see how it's apportioned, our energy use. Things get muddled because, the electricity, some of it's used for your heating to, say, run the blower motor. So, it's good to have this to tell us what the percentages are, because I don't think a homeowner like myself kind of can figure that out on their own that easily, And I think it's good to know that a full quarter, though, is like from the optional kind of where you have a lot of ability to reduce your usage. But it's and I was surprised. I didn't really think that air conditioning would be that little.
I know, that struck me too.
Yeah.
And of course, maybe that'll change with global warming, and of course, it's New England. This pie would probably look very different if it was Georgia.
Definitely would. And one thing to keep in mind here, too, is that this is typical house. And some houses have whole house air conditioning and probably use significantly more. Some houses have no air conditioning. So this represents the average for the state.
And I think, let me add one thing. I think because I've been using natural gas for the heating and hot water, so I have gas and electric bills, and so I don't know how much goes towards the heating completely. And okay.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, and one thing, Tom, just to mention, your energy, your financial bills don't necessarily, or don't actually reflect energy use, and energy use doesn't necessarily reflect greenhouse gas emissions. So it is something that the homeowner really has to dig into a little bit to get a sense of how this pie chart works. And just to go back for a second to that slide, that 3/4 of the energy use that we mentioned earlier in home heating and hot water, for almost at least 90% plus of the homes in our state, that is a result of burning fossil fuels, natural gas or fuel oil for the most part, for home heating, for hot water. Some people do use electric resistance heating for their hot water, but many people also use fuel oil and natural gas. So that's an important point to make that we'll get back to.
So let's turn to the other part of the puzzle here, transportation. So we've got an analysis of transportation here too.
Right, and what I wanted to show here was, again, another pie chart showing transportation as a whole, and what portion of our transportation emissions come from private vehicle use and what comes from other transportation uses. And again, surprisingly, private vehicle use is nearly 60% of the total emissions from transportation as a whole in the state. The rest of this pie chart, the orange section, represents things like trucking, shipping, aircraft, and the like. And all of that together is less than what we use or the emissions that we create by driving our own cars.
Back to Tom's earlier point on one of the other slides, it's like the good news is there's a lot we can do as individuals to make a difference in greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So if we look at some of the main actions in our homes and apartments to lower our carbon footprint. There's, if we look at the next slide, we look at the strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And, you know, I mean, I guess the obvious statement is to electrify everything you can in your home that currently uses some form of fossil fuel. Arnie, comment?
Exactly. So that this strategy is really a two-part strategy. One is the first part is what we call electrifying, or fuel switching is a term that's sometimes used, from fossil fuel use in your private vehicle, for your home heating, for your hot water, switching fuels from fossil fuels to electricity. That's one major, that's the major component of the overall strategy. The other major component is that if you do this fuel switching from natural gas or fuel oil or propane, any fossil fuel, to electricity, that is beneficial to emissions only insofar that that electricity is non-emitting, or 100% clean is often the term that's used. So those two things have to go together in order for this strategy to work.
So Tom, you've got an electric car.
Yes, I do.
Do you find it expensive to buy and operate by comparison? I assume your last car was a more traditional one?
Yes. From my estimates, it's about half the cost for fuel. Looking at the EPA estimates, it's about, if you take an average of 12,500 miles a year, a gas car that gets the average 27 miles to the gallon would use about 575 gallons. And let's say that you pay $2.50 a gallon, which is actually pretty cheap, right? Right now. That would come to about $1,437 a year. Now, for the electric car, which if it uses 3.57 kilowatts per mile, which actually is what my car has been, by the driving I've done, it's really coming close, or more than that. But so if we take the conservative estimate at 20 cents per kilowatt, which is about what we're paying here in Chelmsford, that comes to about $700 a year. So it's actually half of what it would be for a gas, a lean. And it's also less expensive in terms of maintenance. Very little, no oil changes, no transmission jobs. You'll probably never have to do a brake job. So far, I really am finding it too good to be true, but I mean, it's very inexpensive.
Yeah, I agree, because I also have one, and I have to say the other thing is that we tend to see the headlines are the expensive electric cars. There are a lot of reasonably priced electric cars, and there are new incentive programs coming out in the state in January that will help support purchasing them.
Right. Yeah. You're right. Absolutely. The actual base price of the car itself, I went for the Chevy Bolt because it was much less expensive than the Tesla.
Yes.
And with the rebates and incentives, it really is. And with the increase in range, until electric car could get, over 200 miles, it then wasn't really your all-purpose car. But what I found, I've already done a trip where I went 255 plus miles, and all I had to do was stop once at a fast charging station and just kind of bring it up, and I was able to finish the trip easily. And it actually was free. It was at a Nissan dealer. It was a good thing.
That's great. All right, so turning to the other area of household emissions, home heating and cooling. Arnie, what's your advice to homeowners? We've got a slide on that too.
Okay. So we've talked about the two major areas that we have to target to reduce our household emissions. And we just
Yeah.
talked about transportation, and that's the biggest piece. But another piece that we absolutely have to address if we're going to meet our greenhouse gas emissions targets is home heating. And we've seen that that represents a very significant portion of our total household greenhouse gas emissions. And the way that that sector is going to be targeted is through this same strategy, fuel switching. In the case of home heating, it's going to be from natural gas to electricity, from fossil fuel oil to electricity, in some cases propane to electricity, but in all cases, what we now have available as a technology is what's called heat pumps. So this is a very significant technological advance over traditional what's called electric resistance heating, which many people may have had earlier on. It's a sort of a baseboard using electricity running through it to generate heat. In the case of a heat pump, it actually extracts heat, if it's what's so-called air source heat pump from the outside air, or if it's what's called a ground source heat pump from the ground itself. And it can do so 3 to 5 times more efficiently than electric resistance heating. So looking at heat pumps as a way to both efficiently heat, and not only heat but cool your house. They're very efficient air conditioners as well, and some people actually buy them mostly for their air conditioning capability. And their low energy use compared to fossil fuel use or even electric resistance heating, combined with the ability to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions once our source of electricity becomes clean. That looks, to me like this is the way we're going to target that segment of our
But it
household
requires
energy
a
use.
homeowner to completely replace or whatever their existing heating system. That's a tough decision.
It's a tough decision. So
We've got a slide on the replacement rates opportunities.
exactly. So one of the questions we're going to face with any of these transitions, when any of these fuel switching from even for your car or for your home heating, typically a homeowner would look to do a replacement when his home heating system, his or her home heating system, is nearing end of life. So we wouldn't expect a homeowner to look at their existing natural gas or fuel oil furnace and say, well, I only installed this 2 years ago, I'm going to switch over to a heat pump. No, we don't anticipate that happening. So what we do need to think about is what's often called replacement rates. And for furnaces, that is a number typically around 15 years, plus or minus. And so what we're asking and what we think that homeowners should start doing is, first of all, educating themselves about what this heat pump technology is all about.
I thought you were going to say, and how old your furnace is. That many of us don't know that.
Well, if your heat pump has started, if your furnace has started to require frequent service, then you might think it's nearing end of life. But I think the education portion is very important so that the homeowner knows that there is this very efficient, very clean, very comfortable alternative for heating and cooling, to an outside air conditioning unit or a window air conditioning unit and their existing furnace, to know that that's the case. And then even if the homeowner isn't going to make an immediate switch, but has some idea that, in the next few years, switch is going to be required, when that time comes, the homeowner won't immediately say, well, I'm just going to replace my old natural gas furnace with a new natural gas furnace. They'll look to do that replacement with a heat pump.
And you've already begun some of this, Tom.
Right. So one way to encourage people is to, have them get in touch with Mass Save, to have them come out and do an energy audit. Because regardless of what you use to heat, the better your house is insulated, the less energy you're going to use. And when they come out, they can give you information as a homeowner on switching from the traditional central heating system to the potential configurations for heat pumps, which are can be very different. People are very used to having ducts and a big furnace and heating their whole house with all these registers. But the one nice thing about the heat pumps is you can do individual systems called mini splits to do a room or two. And you can do it as a supplemental or gradual, rather than waiting for your big furnace to die and be in a panic. You could start with a section of your house that maybe needs it's cold spot. I had a cold spot, so I added a mini split, and it's really taken care of it. And it also, the air conditioning was a wonderful bonus during the last summer.
So you've led us actually, I think, did we
Yeah.
have one more slide, which is on the cost challenge, if you will.
Yeah.
And there it is. So we've got this is the challenge of switching to electric.
Yeah, I'll speak to that,
Yeah.
and Tom, that's a great point. I mean, the homeowner for this heat pump technology, and there are various configurations that you can get, needn't, jump into the pool totally.
Yeah.
They can do it, get their feet wet and
Exactly.
start to do that transition.
Yeah.
So I think that's another approach that homeowners should think about. But lastly, I think we do need to talk about costs. Obviously, there's a cost associated with switching from your existing heating system to any other heating system, and that would be the case with going from a fossil fuel furnace to a heat pump as well. But then we have to also look at operating costs, your month-to-month bills that you're going to get either from your electric utility or your natural gas or fuel oil provider. And in that case, we do have a challenge that we need to face. For most homeowners in the state, and Massachusetts, unfortunately, has one of the higher average electric rates in the country. Running a heat pump as compared to a fuel oil furnace, that's sort of a neck-and-neck operating cost comparison.
Unless you have solar cells on the roof.
Bingo.
But comparing it to natural gas, actually, natural gas at its current price and electricity at its current price, you're actually, it is not a financial advantage. So that's something that we need to face. There's a number of ideas that we can talk about if we had time. But Tom, let me turn it over to you for a second on that.
Well, I'm not sure. We don't have a lot of data. Not many people are using them, the heat pumps. It may turn out that they're not quite as expensive to use in real use, where people start to multi-zone their houses and really aren't using all of their mini splits, and so they use less energy than they used to with their central heating system. Trying to think what.
That's an excellent point.
I agree.
I mean,
I've just started to change my house, and
Yeah.
I know that the heating pattern in my house is different. I'm more comfortable all the time, but I'm not heating spaces I used to heat. So
Absolutely,
Well,
with
and
these
that
mini split systems that Tom has.
That made me think of another thing. I know not everyone can have solar, but I know people really are concerned about security. And security for you're heating your house. Gas prices are going to go up or down, fluctuate, so is electricity. One way to be secure is to have your own green power. And that's why having the solar is such a win-win. Then you know what price it is. It's zero once you've paid off. And so that's a constant. But, I mean, that's the optimal, especially. But as you start to add more and more electrical appliances, like heat pumps, like cars, you're using, and hot water, air source heat pump hot water, you're going to need more electricity. So the motivation, I think, will grow, too, for solar.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. We're out of time for today. And I appreciate both of your comments. It's been very helpful. In Elders Climate Action, we support various actions by Beacon Hill to lower the cost of electricity and transition all power sources to cleaner forms of power. Elders Climate Action meets regularly in Chelmsford and elsewhere in the greater Boston area at the library to explore the challenges of climate change and what actions we can take. Please join us. Look for meeting announcements on Facebook at Elders Climate Action, the Massachusetts chapter. Our series of discussions on climate challenges we all face will continue here in coming months. Thank you.
Thank you.